Welcome, everyone. Welcome to our final webinar of the year about why leaders accelerate competitive advantage. And I'm delighted to have you all listening in on how we can make transformations stick. Whilst we're waiting for everyone to log in, it's always a crazy rush. Right on the hour. But I can introduce, whilst we're waiting for people, how this webinar came about and how the topic. We tend to create topics based on a conversation or something that we've heard in the last month or so. And this one, I met with a brand new CEO the other day who had arrived in the country recently. And on his first day, he must have been a bit punch drunk with jet lag, I think. But he sat in that 60 minutes that I had with him and absolutely burst forth with 1,000 ideas about all the things that he was going to do in his first 90 days. He'd met with all of the executives kind of over virtually over the month or so beforehand. So he knew some of the executives, and he was already appointing some of those executives to be leading some of the projects. And it was just this sort of dump of stuff. And as I was listening to him, I thought, none of this is going to work because you haven't actually brought in any of the leaders to it. And it was all to do with driving not only a digital transformation, but cost reduction and growth and all of these sorts of things. And I thought, this is the sort of thing that makes transformations fail. And it kind of prompted me to put this webinar together about how we can get leaders, just like that CEO, to actually accelerate competitive advantage and accelerate transformation success and accelerate what kind of results we want when we invest in a transformation. So leaders and leadership is just really, really critical to the success of transformations. And it seems unfathomable that this isn't the number one critical success factor in any of our transformations. So that's how the webinar came, came about. And so let me introduce myself. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Evelyn Muhlenberg, and I'm your host, your Learning Ventures host today. I'm a 30-year veteran of the sector. In the last 12, nearly 13 years as the Managing Director of Learning Ventures. And what I love about learning and development, leadership and organisational development is that we can actually really transform lives. And it's this transformation of people that actually makes organisations successful. No matter how much technology you add and how much marketing, all of those sorts of things, it's the people that make it successful. And I actually think it's pretty much one of the best jobs in the world. A couple of housekeeping things. We're going to have a few polls that we're going to go through. We're going to have some calls to action. All of our webinars are available on demand. So get involved. By all means, introduce yourself in the chat function as we go. Learning Ventures has 3 strategic pillars. We like to challenge conventional thinking. We like to be ahead of the pack in terms of what's changing in our sphere and actually adopt what's practical for us to adopt. We don't adopt everything that goes through, but it's interesting that at the moment there's a lot of talk about generative AI, and I spoke at a conference a month or so ago about how we can utilize generative AI in the learning and development sector. And it's a really interesting topic, but I actually think it's a bit of a game changer. And that challenging conventional thinking for us is, how do you use some of this groundbreaking technology to actually really aid and not hamper the work that we do? Leadership Really Matters is pretty critical to success of organisations. We think it's the key success factor. And that's why this webinar is brought to you by Leadership Really Matters. And also, we like to deliver results. And I guess all of this sort of combines, because if we're not thinking ahead of the pack and focusing on leaders, we're never going to be able to deliver the kind of results that we need. So this webinar is about competitive advantage, and there are so many things in organisations that can contribute to competitive advantage. Our target markets, our world that we live in is extremely dynamic. And if we don't actually adapt to what our clients and our customers and our suppliers' changing needs and preferences, we'll never actually stay competitive. And sometimes we will need to transform our organization and its thinking and its mindsets in order to be able to maintain or even stay ahead of and achieve that competitive advantage. As a great example at the moment, the hospitality sector, and we have a quite a sizable portfolio in the hospitality sector, but the drive with guests at the moment for sustainability in these hotels. And it's not just about the sheets and the towels, it's about everything in the hotel to drive that sustainability. And so therefore, organizations in hospitality really have to shift the thinking and transform their organizations in order to be perceived by guests as having that sustainability competitive advantage. And there's a lovely hotel in a Crystal Brook Hotel in Cairns, which actually gives you glass bottles, not the plastic bottles for water, but glass bottles that you can refill from an art installation down that sort of filters all the water through that's in the foyer. And it's fabulous stuff like that that can give an organization competitive advantage. They also have little timber recyclable keys and a whole range of things. But they're the sorts of things that can give you competitive advantage. Innovation can give you better differentiation in the market. And again, that is a transformation. And it's about fostering a culture of innovation that gives you that transformative or competitive advantage. And so therefore your people can start to develop better products, services, processes, business models, things that will differentiate you in the market. Competitive advantage can be achieved by cost efficiencies, customer centricity, brand enhancement and awareness, digital and technology. All of these transformations can make organizations much more efficient and effective, leaving more margin with which to invest in competitive advantage. And obviously, as I mentioned earlier, in today's marketplace, generative AI. And AI is really going to start driving some of the effectiveness to take away some of the repetitive processes. Sometimes we may think actually, sometimes we may need to think more in the future. What are we going to need in 3 years? Not what are we going to need in the moment? And all of these sorts of things can achieve and help us to achieve competitive advantage, but it is all dependent on organizational change and transformation. We need to transform our organizations in order to be able to achieve this competitive advantage. And that cannot happen without great leadership. There's a wonderful statistic around that 70% of these transformations all fail. And I'd like to start with a poll. I'd like to find out what you think the reasons are why 70% of transformations fail. So Sharon is going to help me and load up a poll about why organizational transformations fail or fail to deliver what is expected. So have a shot at it. Is it a lack of clear vision and strategy? Perhaps the people are resistant to change, ineffective leadership, poor communications, or low employee engagement and involvement. And I didn't put all of the above because I wanted you to take a punt on one or the other as you go through. So by all means, keep answering the questions as we track through. I'll give you a few more minutes. What we're going to cover today is why transformations fail, and it could be any of all of the above, how leaders can impact transformations and make them more successful, and some actionable tips that we will have at the end. So for those of you who've answered the question, why don't we have a look at the results? At this stage, we've got a 50% think it's the vision and strategy, around about a 33% think it's the resistance to change, and another 17% or thereabouts think it is the poor communications. Well, you've stuck a what do you call it, a little pin in my balloon by nobody saying it's ineffective leaders, because that's a really key one. But anyway, let's Samantha, how can I help you? If you've got a pop a little post in the chat, Samantha, and we'll be able to answer any of your questions as you go through. Sharon, do you want to share the results of the poll so everyone can see the results as we go through? So as you can see, it's about vision and strategy, resistance to change, and poor communications. Thank you very much for answering those results. And let's kick off then with the rest of our webinar. So why do transformations fail? I'm actually going to talk to 3 papers that I've been researching on why transformation fail. And that starts with the John Kotter paper back in 1995, published in the Harvard Business Review, and it all sort of lends itself a little bit to his 8-step change program. I think Sharon's going to drop that research paper into the chat function so you can just download it and have a read of it as well. Back in 1995, this paper was pretty iconic, and I know it's a very busy slide, but it's his 8-step transformation process. Kotter, of course, found that there were 8 things that caused these transformations to fail. One of which, the first one, was about not establishing a great enough sense of urgency. And the client I referred to in the opening actually had a great sense of urgency, but it was totally mismatched with number 2, which is a powerful guiding coalition, which is the leadership of an organization. Some years ago, we worked on a transformation project, which was nominated for an ARI Award for Innovation. And the CEO on that particular project was just amazing. He created that sense of urgency, and he actually galvanized the whole organization and all of the leaders and all of the team members. And he role modeled actions all the way along, which actually drove that particular change program. And I'm going to refer to that a couple of times as we go through. That program delivered double-digit growth in their business. And the sense of urgency was created because the European parent had said, we're going to close some of you down, some of your divisions down if you don't actually turn them around. So not creating a powerful enough sense of urgency and a full guiding coalition of leadership is what's going to cause a whole lot of change and transformation programs to fail. The next one refers to exactly what 50% of you said earlier, and that is about lacking a clear vision and a strategy. Where the vision for success is unclear, it's never going to be able to deliver because people don't have a very clear picture of what they need to achieve. So that's the third reason why transformations fail. And it was the number 1 reason that you all answered in the poll. How many technology transformations have you been a part of that haven't had a clear vision for success? And I was actually listening to the Westpac CEO at whether his annual general meeting or half annual general meeting the other day, and he was talking about this fantastic technology transformation that was coming. And I thought, hang on, I've heard that before. And Westpac have been talking about this replatforming for 15 years. It's not new and it's not clear. And even at that AGM or half AGM, the picture he was talking about was replatforming. That's not a great vision for success. And it's really interesting that some of our large organizations are still unable to create that crisp vision for success that organizations need in order to transform effectively. The next thing that Kotter talks about that is a real Achilles in transformations is under communicating. And he said back in 1995 that it was by a factor of 10. Now, I don't understand actually how we can get this so wrong. Treat the transformation like content marketing. It's a brand marketing play. You communicate more effectively and you'll get your key messages across if you treat it like you're advertising and marketing something. And that's exactly what that powerful vision for success needs to be. And you've got to repeat the messages again and again. Key to this is actually having every single leader, that powerful guiding coalition, on board to the change. And this is often why organizations fail miserably. they just don't have all of the leaders on board, and they haven't put the effort into getting all of the leaders on board. We then start to talk in terms of reasons for failure about not removing obstacles, poor planning, declaring victory too early, and not actually then institutionalizing all of this change into the culture. Nearly all of these failures relate to poor leadership. Poor leader communications, poor leader buy-in. It's no wonder this webinar is about how leaders could accelerate change and transformation to deliver that competitive advantage, because 7 of the 8 reasons that Kotter quoted in 1995 relate to leadership. And it's these transformations that will give any organization their competitive advantage. Okay, let's move it forward. Let's fast forward. Gallup did a longitudinal study back in 2013. McKinsey in 2015. And this is what that number, 70% of change programs fail. Forbes did an article in 2017 in June and published it in the Harvard Business Review. All of them say exactly the same thing. The number, 68, 70, 72, all has a small deviation, but pretty close to 70% of change programs fail. Now, that's over a period of 30 years. They're still quoting the same statistic. There's a great quote from the financial journalist in the Forbes article in May 2019. And she says, "It is puzzling to see companies spending $50 million on their new technology platform, but less than $100,000 on the employee engagement to execute it successfully." The organization just assumed that the $50 million that they put into their change program or their technology was going to ensure that the people would be on board. It's not true. Once again, we know that the top 10 out of the top 12 levers for employee or getting employees engaged in change is to do with leadership. My leader takes an interest in me. My leader checks in with me. My leader helps me understand the link between what I'm doing and where we need to go and the purpose of the organization. We're talking about meaning and purpose. Okay, fast forward again. This is the McKinsey paper, and I think we've also got this in that Sharon will load into the chat for us. This is from last month, and it has a slightly different slant on it in that we're talking about how do you actually sustain your competitive edge through transformation, because if we actually look at our world at the moment, we're going to be in transformation all the time. It's just not going to stop. So how do we actually sustain that competitive edge whilst we're doing that? And it's based on the latest research, but it talks about the fact that major transformations do take time and energy. Plus, we have to do business as usual. And to maintain that energy is going to give us the competitive edge. The research confirms that organizations lose potential value and competitive edge in every one of the 4 stages of their process: goal setting, planning, execution, and after execution. And when I read this, I actually just laughed. How can we all be so hopeless that less than 30% of organizations get it half right? Very few of these nail it. I mentioned earlier the client that took us to the ARI Awards, and that was actually just a fabulous project where we partnered with on the whole transformation to deliver not only the double-digit revenue growth, but the catalyst was the leadership. And as a result of that, there was a whole shift in culture in less than 12 months with this program, and the intense energy of the program, that burning platform and the vision that the CEO delivered to everyone, they delivered the required outcomes, and the culture was really buzzing. We had an exercise at Christmas, which was kind of like a pay it forward exercise with little sticky notes, and it was just fantastic, the kind of energy behind it and the exuberance in the culture. They were definitely part of the 30% that nailed it. That said, and here's a really interesting insight, is that they changed their CEO some years after, and a bit like an elastic band, it all returned to their previous behavior or their old ways. Revenue flatlined, and the program, the change program, actually fell over. And the leadership just wasn't there. The new CEO didn't have the burning platform, and he didn't have the energy behind it. And so therefore, it shows that leadership can be the critical and key success factor. So back to the McKinsey article that I'm talking about. They use here the influence model. And the influence model for transformation, once again, it focuses pretty much solely on people skills. It talks about 4 things. 1, communicating the bold ambition. Sound the same as Kotter back in 1995 in terms of creating that sense of urgency and the burning platform. Well, leaders do this. Secondly, it talks about mobilizing a leadership network to role model the change and the transformation. Kotter called that the guiding coalition. Similarities, leaders do this. The third thing is about process alignment. This article talks about real alignment in their processes. Interestingly, these days, unlike in 1995, when organizations were very structured hierarchically, we're now talking a lot more. I hear a lot more talk about organization design, and that's aligning your org structure, processes, rewards, and culture to deliver the strategy that you have. And this has led to a lot of noise in the workplace about skills-based workplaces and loose networks of teams. I hate to be skeptical, but I actually really worry that a lot of organizations don't actually realize what that change means and the shift that it's going to take to shift from a hierarchy, which has a legacy of hundreds of years, to a loose network of teams. And I'm not talking about startups. They start up like that, but this is organizations with legacy. That said, good process alignment involves leadership and the culture. They're the ones that have to align the process and understand the alignment that goes through. In the McKinsey paper, they talk about influence change model, which is about bringing along and helping people gain new skills at scale. Their focus is on closing this sort of capability chasm that they call it. Companies often acknowledge that technology and digital transformation is what's going to drive this. And whilst it is, actually, it's people capabilities that are going to drive this. For competitive advantage, you will need an integrated system or set of people, skills, the alignment of processes, and finally, the technology that's going to enable that. Technology is the last thing, not the first thing. For the future, we will need to adopt new skills at scales, and that will need to adopt is competitive advantage these days. And those skills are the critical thinking, collaboration, problem solving, data-driven strategy. They're the skills. And a lot of these papers talk about the fact that 50% of the skills we now have, we won't have or won't need in the future. So once again here, that's about leadership recognizing that we have to do this and role modeling all of these new behaviors. The last piece of the introduction is about Gartner put an article, and I don't have the Gartner article, but you can put open source change management into Google. But they're talking about these loose networks of teams. It reflects on what I mentioned earlier, which is that it's about to be more agile and have that competitive advantage. You're going to need these loose networks. However, just because we have loose networks of teams doesn't mean that we're devoid of leadership. In fact, leadership, coaching, all will need to be democratized in these new workplaces that are more agile. Everyone will need leadership skills. What I love about the article is that it says change management's broken. And I couldn't agree more. If since 1995, that's nearly 30 years, 70% of transformations still fail over that 30 years, it must be broken. So what do you think? Let's load our next poll. And Sharon will load that. Do you think change management is broken or transformation is broken? Sure. Strongly agree. Yeah, it must be flawed because everything's failing or 70% are failing. There are significant issues because the world is changing so rapidly. So whilst I agree, not sure I 100% agree. I'm neutral. It's hard to say whose the fault is, the people or the processes. Disagree? While change and transformation have challenges, it's not the process's fault. And the last one, strongly disagree. No, it's not broken. With the right mindset and leadership, it can be very successful. Oh, I don't think I can see strongly disagree on there, so just pop it into disagree. So have a go at it in terms of the poll that's there. And by all means, if you want to jot down some thoughts into the chat, I think what we're getting here is about 50% of people say it's the mindset and the leadership. Yay. It is hard to say, and I don't think there's an easy thing here. But I do love that 70%, nearly 20% of folks that say it's got to be flawed because all these initiatives are failing. Look, thank you very much for answering the poll. We'll share the results now. Over half of you think it's the mindset. I don't think this is an easy one, but thank you very much for your responses to the poll as we go through. Okay, so let's talk about how leaders can impact. I've pretty much mentioned it. Now I'm showing you this. I love this photograph. I think it's hilarious. It just makes me laugh. And this is considering the news this morning that David Cameron, middle son top, is back in Parliament. These are the last 6 UK prime ministers over the last few years, and their differences are demonstrated by their lectern. The thing that is funny about this is that that's often what leaders do. A new PR hack or whatever says you've got to demonstrate that you're different from everyone else. And in UK Parliament, they've done it with their lectern. So yes, it's a way to demonstrate change, but alternatively, what a superficial way of demonstrating that there's been a change or a transformation. So yes, the point is that real leadership is not about the superficial lectern, the logo, the brand, the snappy piece of communications. Not that all of this isn't a way to sometimes support change and transformation. In learning and development and cultural transformation change, we need to take people on the journey, and marketing tools, as I mentioned earlier, can really help as support the change. But real change that leads to competitive advantage is about real inspiration and motivation and real demonstrations of change. And whilst a visible, I'm not sure, well, I probably shouldn't make a political comment about UK politics, but I'm not sure we've seen a huge amount of transformation and change despite all of the faces that are there. Back to the example of our program that was the ARI Award winning. The CEO of that, as an example, the CEO was on a sales call with one of their sales executives in Perth during the process of this transformation. And they just had the sales call and they were debriefing after. Now, the program, what we'd done is we crowdsourced 5 behaviors or 5 behavioral clusters from the whole organization about what they thought were the best ways that that organization could change, or the best things that would demonstrate and help them to change. And one of those was moving beyond barriers. That was a cluster, to move beyond barriers. So remember that this program was about delivering double-digit growth. So the CEO and this sales exec was sitting there and they'd had a pretty troublesome meeting with a client. And the CEO sat down and said, look, how do you think? Well, in fact, it wasn't the CEO. It was actually the business development executive that said to the CEO, how do you think we can move beyond barriers here? And the two of them started to energetically brainstorm solutions to move barriers, not just offering the world to keep the piece of business, but to move the barriers that the client had put in place so that they could win the account. And ultimately they did win the account, that they were there. But it was the leadership demonstration from the CEO and the embedding of that move beyond barriers that actually shifted and helped that transformation move. And that's what leaders can do. In the McKinsey article I mentioned earlier, they talk about 10 seismic shifts, and there's a terrible statistic that in their research that only 5% of respondents said that their organizations already had the leadership and the capabilities that they would need to deliver competitive advantage. So what that article said is that leaders needed to, one, inspire change and inspire the change in transformation, and that's that vision into action, or that vision. Facilitate change, and that's facilitate and coach, not tell and not be the leader at the front of the pack, but facilitate and coach the people to do that. Provide and facilitate the skills and resources and remove the barriers so that the people could deliver, and help the people to deliver that transformation, change, and competitive advantage. So it's not about me as the senior leader shining or starring. It's about the people delivering. And I think that's that real shift that we're looking for, that democratization of leadership that's going to really enable our organizations to achieve that competitive advantage. Now, leaders can have who are neutral, who haven't got that energy to lead that vision. Leaders that have that energy can force multiply and accelerate the results that come out. Leaders that are neutral or even slightly negative can force multiply the negative impact. So in fact, leaders can either accelerate or they can accelerate the impact in a negative way. And really that leads to resistance, burnout, malaise, all of these sorts of negative impacts. Liz Wiseman has a book called Multipliers, and the concept is that is the concept of these leaders being able to multiply their team members' effectiveness. And a lot of what she talks about is about focusing on strengths. And what I think is quite interesting, there's a lot of organizations that do the Gallup or the Zenger-Fogman and have strengths-based leadership embedded in their organizations, yet when they do assessments for talent and things like that, the development plans still focus on strengths, but they also focus about bringing weaknesses up to a competent level so that that person can move forward. And in fact, multipliers have really well-defined strengths, and they only work on weaknesses if they are fatal flaws. And they are flaws that are absolutely going to stop them from moving forward. So some things you might have in short supply, but if it's not a fatal flaw, we don't necessarily need to develop it, because you can always put somebody else in your team that's got that skill. Now, interestingly, about fatal flaws that we have, or development plans, I guess, I think the key fatal flaw that leaders have in this day and age and in this market is a lack of EQ. And that should be one of the number one things that organizations are focusing on. Now, I'm conscious of the fact that I've only got about 5 or 10 minutes left, and I'm happy to take sort of questions if there is time at the end. So what are some of the key impacts or actionable tips? And today they're not necessarily as actionable, but they're the key summary of where we're going. And what we're talking about is the clear things that will help your transformation for competitive advantage stick and work. And then it refers back to a number of the things that you actually said earlier when you answered that very first poll that we had going through. Goes without saying, we've talked about it the whole way through. Leaders must have a clear vision and strategy. Tip number one, and it was your number one, a lack of clear vision and strategy that you answered in the poll. So as Kotter said in his 1995 paper, and I know it's 30 years, error 3 was lacking vision. Error 1 is not establishing that sense of urgency. That is our vision and strategy. Much better, that vision and strategy, when we have the involvement of the team. And we definitely learned that when we did that project at the logistics company, where we got the crowdsourced the 5 things that organization felt they could buy into to help drive this urgent strategy that they had. And leaders are the key to this burning platform vision and strategy, because they can be the force multiplier if they've got it right. So the flags in the foyer, the T-shirts, the lecterns are not going to do this. This is what's embedded in leadership. The leadership alignment and commitment. Alignment, to a certain extent, is easy. Leaders need to believe that their goals need to align to the strategy. It's got to make sense for them. However, the commitment is hard. Remember, I quoted earlier the Forbes magazine article where she said they spent $50 million on the technology and less than 100,000 on the employees to deliver it. I was chatting to a client the other day, and exactly that was happening. They were talking about the fact that their leadership budget was being squeezed because the tech budget was ballooning. I say no more. It's just incongruous to me that we can't elevate the status of how important leadership commitment is to change. Leaders need to engage from manager, leader, supervisor, CEO. They have to care about their people, and they have to engage them in the process. To be successful, leaders at all levels need to be actively driving, building trust, and helping people embrace the change and moving beyond barriers and overcoming resistance. Now, if we start to move hierarchical organizations to loose networks of teams, we are going to encounter an enormous amount of resistance, because this is more ambiguous than that. Effective communications. Never ceases to amaze me that we can get this so wrong. Whilst we're dependent, communications are dependent a little on personality, I also think that people use their personalities sometimes as an excuse for not communicating well. And many times when you are selling the vision and strategy for behavior change, it's absolutely critical, regardless of how comfortable you are as a leader in communicating, to over-communicate. In advertising circles, the rule of thumb is 5 times that people need to read or see it, 10 views for it to become more memorable, and 20 views for it to become part of the conversation. How often do we as leaders communicate the same thing 20 times? And I accept that I'm probably not that good at it. 20 times is a lot, but 20 times. But you are communicating and advertising a new vision and a new strategy and a transformation that's supposed to drive a whole lot of energy. So why isn't it 20 times or more? There is an additional complexity to this, and I find that in today's market, there are 2 key things that are going to really hamper our effective communications. One is digital disruption. Many of our communications now are transferred to a digital medium, and people are curating a message and broadcasting it. Now, I call that one-way personal broadcasting. So our messages are personal broadcasting as opposed to 2 ways, albeit my son will tell me that that is 2-way because he's getting a response, but it's a curated message coming back as well. So that digital piece is impacting how we communicate and how often we communicate. But the second thing is work from home. Leaders and organizations now need to be much more deliberate about communications, because we're not going to be able to see people in corridors or chat to them, or they may not be in the office on the same days we are, albeit that many organizations have the Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday policy 3 days a week. So there's some communication, even on those days that they're not work from home, where we offer a lot more flexibility. There isn't that opportunity to have these quick little communications that embed change. So I think there's a downward trend in the volume of communication flow with work from home. And so as leaders in organizations, got to be just much more deliberate to get those 20, the number, going through. So the other thing is that visual communications, as in posters and all of those sorts of things that we used to use in lunchrooms, are becoming less and less effective. So we've got to be really clever in how we get messages across to people to make that effective communications. We've got employee engagement or engagement in the change process. You cannot do it top down. It just doesn't work. If we do not engage employees in the process of transformation for competitive advantage and buy them into the process of delivering the competitive advantage, it's just not going to be successful, and you'll fall into that 70% of organizations where transformations fail. I guess the issue, we did a whole webinar on employee engagement actually a couple of months ago. But the key with employee engagement, again, is leadership, because leaders need to build trust and to help employees buy into strategies and take away the barriers that frustrate people. And where we have a workforce who is not prepared necessarily to sit tight and wait until, we did another webinar earlier on retention, by all means, let us know if you're interested in some of those. But the retention question, employees these days are not prepared to wait for slow leadership. Leadership needs to be quick to move, remove barriers, and make it easy for employees to engage and do their best work as they go through. And the last thing is about measure and adapt. We've got to measure continuously. We've got to evaluate any transformation program. We've got to adapt it, and we've got to demonstrate progress. The key here is progress. It's one of the most powerful motivators, and every single game and game theory is based on the concept and the psychology of progress. That's why you level up and you get new tools in a game, and all of these sorts of things actually drive people to continue. And as organizations, let's take that concept of progress and put it into any of our transformation programs. Again, this is a leadership strategy to utilize and to reward progress going forward. Finally, the last sort of anecdote from our double-digit growth client in the transformation, they used this concept of progress really, really successfully. They engaged with people. They had trophies for the organizations on a monthly, or the parts of the organization that were doing really well. They had chocolate wheels in state offices, which had non-monetary rewards for people that had performed. There was a whole strategy around recognizing and driving progress. And that was very, very successful. So that brings us, I know I have a minute more, happy to answer any questions. That kind of brings us to the summary at the end. Really, look, as we head for competitive advantage, and we all need it, we need to transform our organizations. And with the two stats that I've quoted, that 70% of organizations are unsuccessful, 70% of transformations fail, and the fact that only 5% of our people think that leaders have the skills to transform our organizations, I think we have an enormous gap in there for leadership development with purpose to drive transformation. And as a quick summary in terms of actionable tips, make sure that your leaders sell the vision, they demonstrate transformational behaviors and what they're expecting their people to do. And it's not about us and them and that I'm different because I'm more senior. No, demonstrate the behaviors, align everyone, build trust and engagement in the people that are doing the work, and measure progress and reward, progress. And I guess as a parting point, what's quite interesting is that a lot of organizations, they do leadership development. But leadership development also needs to have a burning platform for it to be adopted. And that experiential nature of leadership will deliver results, or the experiential nature of leadership development that gets embedded in the workplace actually delivers results. And if what we're saying is that only 5% of people think their leaders have these skills, what we need to do is give that other 95% the leadership skills in the moment, in the burning platform, because then they have a reason to embed it. And that's the key thing that I think I'd like you all to walk away with is, yes, it's the leaders, but we need to give them the skills, the 95%, the skills to be successful at leading change in that environment. Thank you. Merry Christmas. Happy to send any of these webinars out for you to listen to. And I hope you have a great holiday season. We'll see you again in the new year. We start again in February, and we've got lots of white papers that you can access. So let us know. See ya.